Good morning, everybody. John Garcia from Atlantic Golf and Turf, and today is March 29th, right, 2022, and I'm here with Scott Mackintosh from Atlantic, as well as Dr. Inguagiato from UConn and Dr. DaCosta from UMass. And we're very, very happy that the tag team of doctors was able to take a few minutes with us here today, and we're happy to have them spend some time with us. Unfortunately, we're not real happy about the topic of conversation, which is winter kill and how we got where we are and what we might be able to do to kind of move everybody forward and communicate properly with your general managers and members and staff and everything else to kind of get us where we need to be as quickly as possible. So with that, I think we've got a limited amount of time. So I think, Scott, why don't we just kind of get into some of the questions that we have and lay the foundation of how we got where we are and then move into what we might be able to do about it.
Yeah, thanks very much. And to Dr. DaCosta and Dr. Inguagiato, thank you very much for your time today. It's really appreciated from everyone at Atlantic Golf and Turf. So thank you very much. I guess, guys, just to knock it off the list here, can you guys spend a few minutes from your perspectives as to why we see POA the way it is for some people?
So I guess, John, I'll go with it first if you don't mind. So always, some of the first questions that, I've been getting is, what is the primary cause, right, of what we're seeing out there? And, every winter is different. And oftentimes, we try to kind of bring it down to one, and sometimes it is like one major event that occurs. But we've had some interesting weather events over the last few months. And so as we've been looking at it, there might be a couple things going on. We're tending to see, again, unsurprisingly, in some cases, that a lot of the people struggling right now with, especially on POA greens and fairways, at least ones that we've seen, is these temperature fluctuations that occurred. But going even back, so if we kind of think about the weather the last couple of months, we saw, a very warm December, during this kind of really important cold acclimation phase that these grasses undergo. We've been seeing kind of warmer fall conditions in general. So there is a potential that maybe some areas were not as cold hardened as we'd like to see them, especially annual bluegrass in more shady areas, I would say, if you have a lot of tree dominated landscapes. And then we moved into January, where we had some pretty extreme cold temperature events. And we're not sure yet whether that had a huge impact, but looking at some of the weather extremes, I was pulling data from one of the golf courses that's part of the winter turf projects that we have quite an extensive amount of information. And so in Southern Connecticut, actually, the soil temperature at crown height, where where we expect to kind of be the most important zone for our turf grasses, we saw several days reach down into temperatures that would be potentially considered killing, time period, killing zones or killing temperatures. So that we had about 2 or 3 days where that happened, and then we transitioned but both of those, both December and January, were relatively drier than normal when we think about precipitation. But now we transition to February, where we had these kind of mixed precipitation events combined with these pretty significant temperature swings, particularly around, I know, John, you and I have been talking about around President's Day weekend. So that week right there, I think, is probably really critical, depending on how the POA fared through those January low temperature events. So now we have more available precipitation depending on where you were in the Northeast. You saw a lot of rainfall, you saw mixed, you saw ice, there was snow. And then on top of that, we had one of the days in particular, right in around that time period, mid-February, around President's Day weekend, where we had almost a 40-degree change from day to night temperature. So we're thinking that maybe this had some to do with it. Some people were covered with ice for a prolonged period of time and saw melt during that time point. You know, you kind of get two groups where people, I have heard some instances where people said that they could kind of smell some anoxia developing. I think that's very specific where they were in the region. I think that many that are kind of more into the Western Mass, Hartford, and South, probably more this issue of crown hydration coupled with low temperature kill. And so that's kind of I think a summary of what we saw with weather and how it might relate to some of the damage that we're currently seeing. And maybe we can talk about this later. We don't know what the effect is of, you know, these last couple weeks of warming, true deacclimation, and a lot of these loss of cold hardening, followed by these temperatures that we got last night and, you know, today. So it'll take a few more days to figure out where we're going to be at with plants that were just starting to recover. John and I went to a golf course this weekend, and we saw a lot of young annual bluegrass plants, you know, putting out new shoots. And so I'm not sure how this is going to play out over the next couple of days.
Great, thanks. You mentioned something about killing temperatures. What temperature range is that typically?
Tricky question, but we start to see, depending on kind of the biotypes of POA, but usually when you start to see like below 15, like into that 5 to 15 Fahrenheit range, is where we can potentially see damage. Certainly at this time of the year, which is why these last 2 nights are so critical, because we were kind of hitting that zone, you know, below 20 degrees after the plants had deacclimated. So there is some concern, especially maybe more south of here where we are, where plants were really being pushed along now for, you know, kind of to try to help promote some recovery. So something to think about.
Great. Thanks very much. So John, is there anything from a disease standpoint that, you know, because Michelle just mentioned shade and a few things that way from a turf physiology standpoint, but is the plant, you know, everyone makes some applications for, you know, fungicides for some, you know, snow mold control, but is there anything that you think can be happening from a disease standpoint that might be impacting POA that we just don't think about? Or is there any, you know what I mean? Is there anything in your...
I think whenever you're, you know, considering winter kill, I think anything that's going to be directly weakening the plant, you know, whether that's, you know, Michelle had mentioned shade,
yeah,
you know, very low mowing heights in the fall, you know, anything that's going to weaken the plant, that's going to compromise potential, you know, carbohydrate and just normal plant health, you know, could potentially set it up to be more susceptible to winter injury.
Sure.
I wouldn't think that there's, you know, a whole lot of direct, you know, impacts in terms of like, you know, that disease explains to much extent the, you know, the severity of injury that we're seeing on many putting greens. But in some cases, I think, you know, that, you know, if you have weakened plants due to disease, you know, it may have contributed as a factor in worsening the winter kill. You know, so, you know, I think what we're seeing this year in particular is definitely more weather dependent, and just the genetics and capability of annual bluegrass, and its lack of tolerance to these types of environmental conditions, more so than a direct disease connection.
Yeah, you know me, curious about that question. You know, I really think it's interesting. You know, Michelle, you gave us a presentation a few years ago where the ryegrass at you know, the university field, gosh, I'm drawing a blank, Dr. Troll's facility there, but the ryegrass was in big disarray, right? A few years ago it was dead, and I think John was just mentioning to me prior to our conversation this morning, that it was in the same situation as well. Is there anything we can learn from ryegrass to help our guys with POA? Because really got hurt quite a bit this year.
Yeah, and we were just walking the fields, and we haven't seen a whole lot of movement yet. We see quite a bit of damage to a lot of the ryegrass areas. It's always interesting with ryegrass compared to some of our other cool season grasses. Because we have the NTEPs, we have these areas that we can see. There's very little genetic variation for whatever this major stressor is on ryegrass, I even think that it's more sensitive than annual bluegrass when it comes to kind of this persistence under ice, water, freezing. There's something about, this species. And again, we don't see a lot of genetic variation. And talking to Scott Ebden here, professor at UMass also, he seems to think he's kind of getting down in there. He thinks there's gonna be potentially some recovery from that. But again, recovery is much slower compared to a species like annual bluegrass as well, right? And so that's one of the, and unlike Kentucky bluegrass, which also tends to recover better compared to perennial ryegrass. So I don't know, it's still early, but what we're seeing right now on all of our ryegrass is indicating that it seems like there's quite a bit of winter kill, especially in our low-lying areas, poor drainage, a lot of just like water sitting there. And
Sure.
This is one of the things we're trying to understand better about ryegrass. And hopefully once we know that, we'll maybe be able to apply some of that information also to understanding POA. Now, I will say that talking to some of the guys out in Western Mass, into Stockbridge, kind of Pittsfield area, a lot of the ones I spoke to were totally fine. Some of them are using impermeable covers, and didn't have a lot of this melting and freezing occurring. The temperatures were somewhat moderated as well. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see where we're seeing most of the damage, but it sounds like those that had impermeable covers seem to be faring better. I haven't talked to too many that have mentioned that even with the covers, they're seeing damage.
Gotcha. Before I ask you a question about covers and get into that part of the conversation, I just want to revert back a little bit. I was at an athletic field place yesterday, a high-end customer of ours, and I can't imagine that the entire amount of death I saw in this athletic field was all ryegrass. So my question for you is, Kentucky bluegrasses, are they also susceptible? And does it take even more extreme conditions for that to be a problem for that plant?
Honestly, Kentucky bluegrass is like a very freezing tolerant species. We don't see that it doesn't have that same level of damage, even right next to it under the same kind of water and ice conditions. We have ours is totally fine. Some may look more dormant, but our bluegrasses and everything else I've seen of bluegrasses, it's mostly kind of just the tips, right, that are died off. I will say that tall fescue though right now seems to be very dormant, at least kind of in our area. So I don't know if there's tall fescue in there as well. But with bluegrasses, we just don't seem to have, it has just as good, if not better, freezing tolerance even than creeping bentgrass, which is very good. So it would probably take a very extreme event. Now, of course, on athletic fields, depending on how much nitrogen, they're pushing, if they have a lot of young succulent leaf tissue going into winter, that kind of changes the whole story. So there's where it could compromise the bluegrass.
Great, thanks. Excellent. And now, so I was in Central Mass this past week, and you mentioned the comment about covers. I'd like to go back to that now, if we could, guys. The impermeable covers have been phenomenal for my customers as well, all the way up onto the North Shore of Massachusetts, Michelle, with Peter Hassick at Tedesco Country Club, right? He's a big fan of yours, and he couldn't get to your study this year, but he wished he did. But his greens came out phenomenal. And I was at another golf course in Central Mass this past week that had an permeable cover, and draw a line where the cover was and where it wasn't. POA was alive and beautiful and green, ready to go this spring, and just outside the cover it is on a line dead or significantly altered.
Yeah. And this is where we see this impact of these temperature fluctuations that would, right? Because if there's permeable covers on there, permeable to water, right? And that's really what we want to understand, that kind of interaction between soil moisture availability, water, and freezing. But in those situations, it does point to the potential for these massive fluctuations in temperature. Now, the covers obviously provide warming, which is one of the benefits to them. And we do see, especially during the daytime temperatures and kind of maintaining some of the nighttime, kind of warmer nighttime temperatures. But it does tell me that the temperature fluctuations could have played a pretty big role when you see either dead or just very dormant grass, right, on the outside of that.
And you mentioned January was definitely open in Central Mass too for most of that frame too. And we had those, like you mentioned, killing temperatures. The University of Guelph has done all kinds of work with their covers, right, over the years, and insulation factors. I have a couple of customers, and well, Dave Johnson at the Country Club this year with the Open happening, he put Inca mats down, and then he put a rainbow cover over the top of that as like a little bit of a sandwich, right? And then he took that Inca mat off. I believe it was the first or last week of February, the first week of March, and he put this permeable covers back on, and he's phenomenal shape. At the Open. And then another customer right down the street has been doing that same labor-intensive, expensive process for better part of 17 years, and he really thinks that's helped him quite a bit. Can you guys comment on that? And they both have a lot of POA. They're mainly POA bent golf course rather, greens rather than bent grass POA greens.
So you're asking about those benefits associated with both an impermeable cover and the Inca mat.
Yeah.
And it's kind of hit or miss whether we see those here in this area. Obviously, the more north you get, that becomes very popular in terms of using an impermeable with some sort of insulation material. And the Inca mats, if you have them, work great. I mean, at the Country Club, they also have great storage areas, but it does, I think, take up quite a bit of space at the other parts of the year. It's just as much of a pain, if not more, than dealing with the covers themselves. So yes, and there's the labor issue and timing and things like that. However, especially when it comes to POA, we know what some of these weaknesses are: temperature fluctuations, big temperature fluctuations, and too much moisture that then will freeze. And so both of those scenarios, having an impermeable cover plus insulation. And I know there was work that was done many years ago in New England where people had sensors under different covering systems, and especially in northern Vermont, I remember very clearly seeing some of the data from up there. Mary Owen was involved in a lot of that. And you could see, very stable temperatures with both the impermeable and the whatever insulation, and that, I don't know, I can't remember which it was. And that becomes an advantage in areas where you don't have a lot of snowfall, right? If you have snowfall, the insulation material is not going to really provide any extra benefit. But if we think about it, the climate is changing, especially up here in these northern areas, northeast. We're going to have these, greater precipitation events occurring, more temperature fluctuations, how much snowfall, how snowfall changes throughout the winter. And so in winters where you probably see less consistent snow cover, and then those insulation materials would likely help more, right?
Yep. So it's hard to predict what kind of weather you're going to get.
Right.
So that's where, one of the guys that's been doing it in the Boston area for a long time, as soon as he can get to February and there's no snow on his surfaces, he takes his cover off and takes the Inca mats out and puts his cover back down, and he's been great.
Yep.
So guys, if we could turn and look forward to now where we're headed and what you might have for thoughts going forward for our customer base and everyone that has problems at large, if we could spend time on that. And John, I'd like to kick it off to you, because gosh, you spent your whole career really studying POA with anthracnose at Rutgers and getting your PhD, and you know that plant very, very well. First question is, how's your turf plots over there at your farm? Is it an excellent, how are the POA plants? Are they good?
Well, I don't know if if anyone can take any solace in this, but our POA field at UConn took a hit with winter kill, just like many other golf courses in the region. I would say that, we've got challenges with surface drainage. We've got very large flat fields, and there's a berm from top dressing over the years around those fields, and that kind of creates those bird baths and limits that surface drainage. And so that's, I think that we really struggled with that this past year in crown hydration due to that water, sitting there melting or ice melting, and then water sitting there and freezing. So yeah, we're dealing with some trouble with our plots. Fortunately for us, we don't have to, we're not as concerned about play coming out there right away, although we are interested in getting some research out there.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, we're going to be we're in the process of starting to initiate both recovery in that field, as well as trying to take advantage of some of those winter-killed areas with some research trials, trying to look at some of the questions that I think, many of us here are, getting all kinds of questions about what we do next. And, there's lots of questions to ask, and unfortunately not a whole lot of real definitive answers on what to say. And so, we're going to maybe try to start taking away a little bit of that stuff since we've got this opportunity.
So what's your inclination then, where you are right now? You want to get some research plots going, but you can't study stuff that hasn't, it's not viable. So what's your gut telling you? What's the first thing you're going to want to do?
Yeah, I mean, so I think, I think for POA, for our plots and, for our interest, we're interested in restoring that annual bluegrass. And obviously that's going to be a different scenario. Some golf courses are going to be, taking this opportunity to get some bentgrass seed into there. But, if your primary interest is trying to get that annual bluegrass cover reestablished, fortunately, that's the one attribute that we can really be happy about with annual bluegrass is it's an incredibly resilient species, largely due to that seed bank. And so, so we're going to get out there and we're going to do some core cultivation, pull up some cores. We're not going deep. We're going to go real shallow. We're really just trying to target that seed bank and try to bring some of that seed up, and then we'll break up those cores, redistribute them over the surface, and then we'll initiate some fertility treatments, probably some light frequent kind of spoon feeding soluble nitrogen sources to kind of try to stimulate and encourage that growth. Obviously the root system's pretty compromised, particularly in those really weakened areas. So going out with heavy nitrogen probably isn't that advantageous. You're just really trying to kind of provide a little bit of nutrients for the limited root system that's present.
Do you guys think, this is more of a question for both of you folks actually, but do you think the grass plants that are kind of on the teetering, are they going to be here or not? We're not quite sure yet. Can you guys discuss what the crown might be going through right now? Is the crown still half alive? I remember Dr. Rossi making a statement when I was in Wisconsin all those years ago about saying the top part of the crown was not alive, but the bottom part of the crown was alive, and that's where you saw some recovery occurring. Can you guys talk about that?
Yeah, it's actually flipped. So there's something about the crowns of grass, and this is all grasses, well, most grasses that we know of. And a lot of this research came out of actually cereal crops, studying winter wheat and oat, and it's very similar. We see these same responses back when Dr. Beard, reported on this, but we see this where there's, different parts of the crown, the upper part, which puts out the new leaves, and the lower part, which puts out the roots. And oftentimes what we'll see, if there's damage to the crown, it's that the root meristem is actually more heavily impacted. So the crowns will actually put up new leaf tissues. And so you might see that and maybe think, okay, well, we're looking pretty good right now, but the crowns will actually fail to root. And sometimes that takes a little bit of time to see if that's happening. And so that's where it becomes a little bit complicated. It's also complicated because, do you wait during that time period, those couple of weeks, to determine that, to have an action plan? So that's another challenging thing to my recommendation would be not to wait, right? So it's a good assessment to have if you can pull plants inside and kind of evaluate what the crowns are doing, if the plant is rooting or not. But having a plan in place if you think you have significant injury, better to move forward.
And I think just to jump in there, I think that evaluation is important because, I mean, I can see, even within our fields here at the research facility, there's different severities of winter injury within the same field. I mean, you can go to certain areas and, to reinforce what Michelle was just saying with the root meristem dying off. Some of the most severely affected areas in our fields, you can literally go in there and you start looking for signs of growth, and there's signs of life, and you might see some of those kind of yellow plants, where the leaf tissue looks very yellow, it looks somewhat turgid. It doesn't look like it's desiccated. You just see these kind of, turgid yellow plants. But if you kind of start scratching at that surface and trying to, get through the top dressing and look in there, I mean, you can actually see those plants just kind of flicking right out of the canopy, as if it was like annual bluegrass weevil had been chewing at the stem base. And I think that would be very indicative of that root crown meristem succumbing to winter, to the winter injuries. Whereas, you go to other areas and you can kind of do that same thing. You don't see the plants pop out. These are crowns that are probably still surviving. There might have been some damage to some of the leaves and some of the upper portions of the crown, but you can still see yellow, but you can see green tissue coming out through there as well. And they don't come out, like I'm saying. So, that kind of assessment and evaluation, kind of identifying what are those areas that have potential for coming back and what are the areas that don't.
Great. All right, this is great. I could talk to you guys for the rest of the morning. I know you guys have to move along. And everyone's gonna be putting down some bent grass, like you were just saying, that has affected areas, and obviously the temperatures that we're going to be facing for the next 40, 50 days, it's going to be very cool. So that amount of germination percentages are going to be very low. Can you folks talk about that a little bit as we go through the season, and how do we stay awake? Well, you've seen plenty of superintendents do a great job with the overseeding plan and remove a lot of the POA over the years. Can you guys reflect on that a little bit without going too, because we have only so much time left here, about overseeding, interseeding, and that kind of thing?
John, do you want to? Or
I mean, I think that this is, these types of events do present themselves with a good opportunity to try to get some more bent grass seed established in there. And anybody that's been growing grass long enough in New England, I mean, this is not the first year that we've had these kinds of issues. And so, I think that we can look to creeping bent grass and see, and Michelle's research has shown this, that bent grass is just so much more tolerant to this. And so taking advantage of getting that bent grass is, I think in the long term, that's a huge step forward to really trying to deal with these issues. The challenge is to get that established. It's very difficult to interseed into an established turf. The success rate is usually very, very low getting that bent grass to establish. But in this situation where you have low competition,
right?
And if you can get that good seed soil contact, which unfortunately we probably have a very good opportunity in some cases here,
yep.
But getting that seed in there, I think that there is a real opportunity to take some major steps forward in getting bent grass established. The challenge, though, is that these temperatures are not conducive for rapid germination and establishment. Okay, and so you get this bent grass to germinate. The challenge is if we get out there and we're too aggressive, if we're too fast to either get play on there or too fast to get cultural practices up to speed out there. I look at those creeping bent grass plants under the best of conditions. I think creeping bent grass can be somewhat of a delicate seedling.
Definitely.
Under these conditions, with cool temperatures, slow growth, they're going to be even more affected by abrasion and traffic stress and things like this. So so there's some real challenges. And I think that while yes, we have an opportunity to get some bent grass in there and that will help in the long term, there's going to need to be some short-term considerations and avoiding traffic, avoiding play, avoiding aggressive cultural practices that could set back those plants from establishing. It's not until you get that good density, that good dense canopy, that you can start to finally kind of have some traffic tolerance. And so while they're individual seedlings, they're just very weak.
I'm happy you said that, John. I was going to try to lead you down that path, and you did it perfectly. I think one of the challenges that our superintendents friends all have is they feel the need, like they got to get holes made, seed put into the ground, and sand on top. We always associate holes with sand, and I think I've seen so much more damage to be done to tender POA plants and new bent grass seedlings. Personally, I've done it, and you think you think you're doing the right thing and you're making improvements for the long term, but you're really setting back what you need to be dealing with at that moment in time. And really, I think you're right, and we can't stress enough. Close these greens for 4 to 6 weeks at least. Let these new plants get established and move along. One of the things that it does, subsequently is it takes the pressure off of the superintendent, where if the green is open, they feel a need to mow it 3 times a week and provide some type of a rolling surface. Whereas if it's closed, they can do everything 100% that's right for the establishment and the development of those new grasses. And I think the members, they get so crazy about it, but golfers have short memories. And, if you get that green back in a hurry, come late May or June, they're not going to remember that it was closed for a couple of weeks in April.
You're right.
And I think that's a really important point.
Yep.
Yeah, and a lot of that will depend, the air temperatures, but the soil temperatures, John mentioned, like, this is super critical right now. Kind of in the southern part of New England into kind of New Jersey, I know that they've hit, they're hitting their 50 degrees and now above that, but we're not quite there. And when you look at bent grass germination, the minimum requirements are in the 50 to 55 degree average soil temperature. But that's just minimum, and you're not going to really get to see growth until those soil temperatures are above 60 degrees, and so when we think about a lot of these next couple weeks, the temperatures are going to be really critical to determine how fast that recovery process is. So I do think it's very realistic to think it could be 4 to 6 weeks out before you can be really trafficking these areas. So
great. And John, you mentioned that that you're going to put down spoon feeding of nitrogen. Can you comment, guys, on the phosphorus requirement for the plant, especially at the early go this time of the year? Does the plant even grab the phosphorus from a granular application in cold weather to get recovery going?
Phosphorus is important for seedling establishment. It's probably getting most of that through mass flow and just, uptake of what's available in the soil. I tend to think that, we want to try to encourage as much root growth as possible. And I think that as long as you're, most of our soils and turf grass systems usually have a sufficient amount of phosphorus inherently in them.
Right.
So I think that's probably what's most impactful is kind of that light, frequent nitrogen fertility at this point. Unless you're in a situation where, you're on a sand root zone with very, very low phosphorus levels.
Right. Great.
What's your thoughts on seed head control? So let's say we've got a green that has 20 to 30% damage, and the guy's made the decision that he's going to keep the green open, or going to keep all the greens open. Do you feel like those greens that have been the most impacted maybe skip those applications this spring, or is it going to have much of an effect on recovering POA and or on establishing bent grass?
I think that. In my conversations with folks, I think this is the time of year where we're typically applying seed head suppression products like Ethifon. And it is the one of the most common questions I'm getting. I hate to do it, but the answer to that question, nobody can definitively give you that answer. It's one of those things that we haven't studied. We don't have good information on whether that's going to be beneficial or detrimental or just be a non-issue. I think if we were talking about something like Embark, which was, a chemistry that we used to use for seed head suppression that was a little bit more harsh on the plant, I would certainly be considering that as something I'd want to stay away from. Products like Ethifon, in general, I see them typically making those plants look healthier, and suppressing those seed heads, in my mind, seems like an advantageous impact on the plant. I want to take all the energy resources of the plant and put it into recuperation rather than seed head formation. So, I can see an argument on both sides. And unfortunately, should you or shouldn't you, we can't say that definitively. I think that the conservative approach would be to stay off of the ethafon, if you can, if you're comfortable in doing so. But like I say, I generally see that as a product that helps POA and makes it stronger. And so, if somebody wants to use it, I'm somewhat tempted to say go for it. This is a question that I'm going to be looking at in some of our trial work here this spring at UConn, where we're going to be having, we've got an area that was affected with crown hydration. We're going to have with and without proxy treatments. We're also going to have some, in combination with different nitrogen sources and some different amino acid type products in combination with nitrogen sources. And just trying to kind of see how some of these questions, some of these factors impact turf recovery. So, I think the cautious and the safe bet is to avoid it. But if you're someone that is really in support of trying to control those seed heads, I don't have any real reason to think that it would be detrimental. It's not as strong of a growth regulator as something like mufluidide was, or like our other PGRs that we use for vegetative suppression. So I don't think it's going to have a huge impact either way.
Great. And so, John, the area that your POA research is taking place on, the crown hydrated problem areas, what's the height of cut on that area?
Well, we haven't mowed yet, but it's typically mowed at 1/8 of an inch.
1/8 of an inch. Did you apply a late season application of fertilizer at the end of the year, or a dormant application?
So typically we do not apply like a late season post, a dormant application. Our last fertilizer applications are usually in about right around October 15th.
Sure. And then Michelle, same for you with the ryegrass. What's the height of cut there? Is it regular height of cut, like 2 inches?
So we have the two areas of ryegrass that we saw damage. One was the ryegrass tennis courts, which are normally mowed at like 5/16 of an inch, so fairly low height of cut. We tend to see more damage there. But we also saw it on the NTEP ryegrass, which that's mowed at like maybe 2 inches, I want to say, 2 to 2.5 inches. And normally we see it on the lower height of cut ryegrass, but yeah, the NTEP was heavily affected. I haven't seen in kind of the taller cut rough, areas, but anywhere where water sat, pretty much that's where we got it.
Right. And was there a late season application of fertilizer or a dormant app on those areas as well? Yeah, there were.
Yeah. So they, I know Scott Ebden is a true, he definitely goes, I can't remember. Normally it's around Thanksgiving for us up here, or just after, probably it was just after this past fall, because it was a little bit warmer later. And so, yeah, we do a late season. He likes the way, we get good controlled green up in the spring from those applications. And so
great.
That's what we do.
Johnny, can I give you a question? Can you talk about your top dressing question to John and Michelle at this point?
Yeah, I know we only have a couple of minutes to wrap up here. I guess what I was noticing early on in the last couple of weeks is the clubs that had heavy layers of top dressing sand that they put down over the winter seem to have less issues going on with their POA right now. And I thought that was a pretty regular occurrence that I was noticing at almost every one of my stops along the way. And then I get on the phone, and Scott and I were talking with Pete Gorman the other day, and he was witnessing the opposite with some of the customers that he was dealing with. So I guess the question is, have you guys seen any correlation, or do you see any, reason to think that maybe more sand or less sand has one influence or the other on what's going on with putting these greens to bed? Or is there really no rhyme or reason to it, like so many of the other issues with winter kill?
I guess I'll say that we've generally seen a benefit of having that late sand top dressing, likely due to, again, some kind of protection around the crown, kind of disrupts how that ice forms potentially in and around there, provides a little bit more air exchange in that zone if you've got ice cover and things like that. I guess there could be too much, especially as we transition to this time of the year, where if the plants are trying to kind of grow out of that, and potentially just not enough interception of light and things. But no, I haven't seen very much kind of in the opposite direction. So I'd be curious.
I'd be curious about maybe what the historical top dressing practices have been at some of those different courses. So, you know, is it a course that's been on a long-standing top dressing program where they have a very, very, you know, well-developed mat layer with sand incorporated into that batch, you know, or, you know, is it a course where maybe, you know, top dressing is a newer practice, and what they have is, you know, a fairly high organic matter content with, you know, a very, very heavy top dressing on top. You know, to me, you know, having that sand, you know, one of the advantages of that sand is, you know, would be kind of drainage and moving water away from the crown. And so in a situation where you've been doing it for a while, you might be able to move more water away from the crown and achieve, you know, that attribute of keeping moisture away from the crown, but also the insulation or protection around it. Conversely, if you have a high amount of thatch and you're just putting sand on top of it, you know, it's probably, you know, it might not be giving you that same, you know, moving water away from it, because that crown itself is probably still embedded in that organic layer, and, you know, might not be, you know, as beneficial. So I'd be curious to see what those profiles look like.
Great. That's a good point. That's a really good point. Great. Well, guys, thanks for your time today. John, I know you have a few exiting words here, but thanks very much for this discussion. Like I said, I could talk to you guys for the rest of the morning easily. I really like this topic of conversation. So thanks very much for your time. Really
appreciate having us. This was nice to be able to kind of discuss some of these different questions. I know there's a lot of concern out there, so hopefully this will be, you know, we hope this will be useful to the superintendents and other turf managers as well.
Certainly hope that everything, you know, hopefully we'll get some warmer temperatures. And that's what we really need right now is some warm temperatures to try to get those soil temperatures up and try to facilitate, you know, as rapid establishment as we can in these surfaces.
Yeah, guys, no, thank you very much. I think the two closing things for me, I'd just like to make the comments of, I think that one of the things that we should all be learning from this is that it would really be beneficial for every golf course to have 5 or 6 covers kicking around. If they're not going to use them going into the winter, at least have them for now to help get these surface temperatures up and get recovery to happen a little bit quicker. It's really, in the big scheme of things, a pretty small investment to make to have that insurance policy on the shelf ready to go. And I've never been a big proponent of them, like I said, over the winter, but right now is when I think you really could get the most bang for your buck out of them. And the other thing is, as a guy, as one of the first guys in the region that regrass greens to creeping bent grass, I watch these things happen every 3 or 4 years, and it makes me wonder with, you know, the disruption that we go through and the cost associated with getting these greens back year after year, and the revenue that's lost, and the fact that, you know, we've got the environmentalists and regulatory coming after some more and more of our tools to maintain POA. I really think that we, as an industry, need to take a look and ask ourselves, does it really make some sense to do a full analysis and look at doing the more extensive regrassing over the next couple of years and just get off of this hamster wheel?
Yeah, and I'd like to say and also put in a plug for our new winter turf project that's sponsored by the USDA. It's a specialty crops research grant led by the University of Minnesota, but many of our institutions here are involved in that. And we're trying to understand, you know, winter injury kind of mitigation factors, but also recovery and reestablishment is going to be part of that. There's going to be surveys as part of that. And I hope that we can kind of, as part of this project, develop this economic impact, economic analysis associated with that. And so I think that this is what we're moving towards. And also in a very multidisciplinary nature, we have a lot of different scientists that are involved in this project that are, you know, even outside of our typical turfgrass disciplines, climate scientists, remote sensing people in Scandinavia as well. So I think that by doing this on a larger scale and kind of incorporating this economic analysis, we have breeders involved looking at, you know, better bent grass species to be able to potentially compete with POA. So, this will be kind of growing over the next couple of years. So I encourage superintendents to become involved in the project, because I think there's a lot of good stuff that's going to come from it.
Great.
Awesome, guys. Well, thank you all very much again. Appreciate your time. I know you guys got all different directions to run in with classes and probably other meetings like this and whatnot. So we look forward to keeping the conversation going and hopefully all being able to learn a little bit something from one another and helping guys get things put back together as quickly as possible. So I'm going to stop the recording now.
Thank you.